What's with water levels? Water levels are, well, levels in a game that take place in or around water. Sometimes they appear identical to any other level in the game, but usually they differ in many ways. The obvious one is that the game's controls will change. The magnitude of gravity is often diminished, but so is player movement. You'll likely find yourself falling slower than normal, or not at all, while player-controlled movement is impeded. Super Mario Bros. Falls victim to this. Instead of running and jumping, Mario ascends slightly every time you press the jump button, and floats down slowly when no buttons are pressed. Controls are made more intricate in some 3D games by the new precept of the camera. Moving from a 2D game to a 3D game has its own conveyance issues, but going from a ground-based 3D to underwater 3D with full spherical movement options convolutes the situation even further. In addition to this, some games cause you to lose health slowly or have a new endurance bar representing breath for when you're submerged. It's not hard to see why water levels get a bad reputation. Players are less comfortable when the controls are changed, especially when those changes serve mostly to just slow them down. The new camera problems also have a tendency to disorient the player. Meanwhile, the need to replenish life, or breath, keeps them constantly in an urgent mindset and never at ease. These are all things that designers need to keep in mind while making a water level. Designers need to consider how they want the player to feel. Sometimes a designer will create a water level to make the player feel helpless, but this can risk making the player feel useless. The player should still feel as though they're in control of their character. Some games use power-ups to make water levels feel nicer, like Unguard the Swordfish from Donkey Kong Country. These power-ups can alleviate or fix the control changes of the game. However, these power-ups need to be significant enough to make water feel different. The camera is harder to deal with. In a 3D game, the camera pointing the player in the direction they need to go discourages exploration. Meanwhile, the camera following the player has issues conveying the right direction to the player. It'd be best to keep the player in control, designing the level itself around telling the player where to go. The whole camera situation can be circumvented entirely by making water levels on rails, similar to a Star Fox game. Breath meters or health loss also discourages exploration, as it makes the player's main goal to get out of the water. Sometimes there are bubbles or other entities underwater used to replenish this meter, like the coins in Super Mario 64. This has the opposite effect, emboldening the player to explore, if only to look for means to restore their breath or health. Altered movement, less gravity, can't breathe. These sound an awful lot like zero gravity levels. Levels that take place in or around space and, as a result, have less or no gravity. Thinking about it now, zero gravity levels are pretty similar to water levels. They both tend to have changed movement controls, they both tend to have altered gravity with an odd camera, and they both sometimes feature a secondary endurance meter to represent breath. And yet, people don't seem to hate zero gravity levels nearly as much as they hate water levels. Why is that? Well, thus far, we've only discussed the mechanical distinctions water levels have with non-water levels. There are also many aesthetic differences as well. Water levels need to be able to immerse the player. Immerse. Water levels are usually tinted blue and often dark and dreary. Sometimes the game makes it harder for players to see underwater as well. Zero gravity levels rarely have the same issues. Sure, space can also be dark and dreary, like in Dead Space, but the type of ambiance present in a space level is a lot more palatable. Anything can look good in front of a dark, starry background. Crash Bandicoot 2's zero gravity levels have a nice collection of colors splashed on screen. Water levels, however, have a harder time finding graphical complements to the blue everywhere, restricting the level style to be very monotone and dull. These two level styles are also subject to varying degrees of fictional fallacies. We as humans have explored more underwater than we have in space. Water levels typically have common underwater elements we're used to seeing: fish, seaweed, the sunken ship. Space levels are much less restricted because we don't know for sure what's out there. It feels right to battle aliens in space because aliens could be out there, as could just about anything for all we know. In this way, space levels give the player a much more whimsical feeling, as though they're going on an odyssey into the unknown, whereas water levels tend to be much more cookie-cutter and expected. These are also things designers should consider when making a water level. Making the level darker shades of blue and decreasing visibility makes the player feel helpless, but again can risk going too far. It's not hard to forget that video games aren't restricted by realism. The water doesn't even have to be blue. There could be some reason the water is instead red, green, or any other color. It doesn't even have to be water. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 features a purple liquid in Chemical Plant Zone that acts just like water. As long as it makes sense with the game, water levels can be any color the designers choose. The contents of the level should also be well varied. It isn't bad to use the expected elements of water levels, but the ocean isn't even as explored as we think. These levels could have interesting creatures that most people would never even fathom, like in The Wonderful 101. Essentially, water levels can be as interesting as the designers want them to be. So what's the point? A lot of people seem to view water levels with vexation. This is likely because of the interference they put into the game's mechanics. Power-ups can be used to lighten the impact of water levels, but the levels still tend to be disliked. Similar mechanical changes exist in space levels though, which aren't regarded with as much disdain. This can be attributed to the mood set by these two level types. Water levels tend to be gloomier, while space levels tend to be more chimerical. Water levels can be made more compelling if designers ditch the conventional traits of the underwater setting and add some spice in future games. And that's what's with water levels.
Cool people subscribe. You should do that. Consider liking and sharing the video to your friends. Leave a comment with an idea for a future video you have. You can also follow What's With Games on Facebook and Twitter.